citizen.
Out of many
we are world citizens, same vision is for equal rights and justice for the people them. What's happening to this beautiful world that we're living in? World citizen, lift up your voices.
Welcome to another episode of the People-Powered Planet podcast, where each week we bring you people with solutionaries who have ways of handling the crises we're facing in the world. You know, so many other podcasts focus on the deep problems and divisions in the world. We focus on people with solutions and how can we create the kind of better world that our founder of our program, Garry Davis, advocated. Garry Davis, who is the subject of our film, The World Is My Country, was considered world citizen number one back in 1948 after being so troubled about bombing cities in World War II. He gave up national citizenship, went to Paris where the UN was meeting, and leapt up in the middle of the UN session and said, "The nations you represent divide us and lead us to the brink of total war." And he called on them to create a governance system of, by, and for the people of the planet. And Garry's one of Garry's and in our film, The World Is My Country, you can see that whole amazing story. Well, one of the people that, you know, after Garry did that, and after Elinor Roosevelt challenged him, said the UN can't create governance, we're just a place that nations can discuss things and let off steam. After Elinor Roosevelt said how much better it would be if Garry Davis and the people that were part of his huge movement demanding such a thing in Paris in that time, 120,000 people demanding it at the Velodrome. She said how much better it would be if Garry would then and there start his own worldwide international government. Well, it was very small in a microcosm, but something really could really help us in the future. And one of the people that Garry Davis picked to be part of his world citizen government was Shann Turnbull. Shann, the man with the plan. Shann, his economics commissioner, has a plan for how to cure the world's gross inequality. Gross inequality is kind of what underlies the drift toward war, toward ecological destruction, climate disaster. And somehow dealing with that gross inequality is one of the key things we need to bring about the kind of future in which the world can thrive and escape from the drift toward its own destruction. So, to introduce Dr. Shann Turnbull, he's a governance advisor, an educator, a speaker, an author of the Democratizing the Wealth of Nations and other books, and he's the founder of the United Kingdom's Sustainable Money Working Group. And he also founded the International Institute for Self-Governance in Sydney, Australia, where he lives. So, without further ado, let me introduce to you Shann, the man with the plan, Dr. Shann Turnbull.
Well, thank you, Arthur, for having me talk with you and your colleagues.
So I would like to just start out by asking you to tell us a little bit more about your experience with Garry Davis and how he chose you to be his economics commissioner.
Well, it was a bit of a surprise to me when he did this, and he used to come along to my lectures on the academic circuit and follow me around, and then he invited me to write articles for World Citizen News, and for about 5 years, I think I wrote about 26 different articles for him, how we could make the people-powered planet a better, sustainable, equitable, well-being place. And I was flattered by his attention, and he gave me a platform to learn how to communicate the complexity of life in a more simpler way. And I hope that this podcast can do the same with your guidance.
Excellent. So you're the founding principal of the International Institute for Self-Governance. Tell us a little bit more about what is that group and what is the Sustainable Money Working Group that you're working with?
Well, after I finished my PhD in the year 2000, I wanted to promote the idea of self-governance, which is the best sort of democracy you can have, where all living things on this planet, except modern humans, are self-regulating and self-governing. All living things must be self-governing to learn how to exist in complex, dynamic, and threatening environments until they mature enough to reproduce. Because all living things have a use-by date, die, and create offspring. Now, the problem is modern society has, but the economic founders never discussed self-governance. Economics, the Nobel Prize Committee in 2009 said that economists unanimously believe that self-governance was impossible. And so, and the world is being threatened by dictatorships in the Soviet Union and in China. And this idea that you needed free markets emerged so that government didn't interfere with business. And they didn't consider self-governance. So there's a whole blind belief that markets provided the solution. Markets fail, and markets create the problems. They are not the solution. The theory of the firm was created by a fellow called Ronald Coase, and he says firms exist because markets fail. Because if you've got a new product or a new idea, how can you make a self-governing automobile or something if they're not suppliers? And you can't have suppliers until somebody invents it. So the only way to put things together is by command and control hierarchies, which are alienating, insensitive, and unresponsible. Command and control hierarchies now dominate the world in corporations, and they are poisoning the world, and they're not accountable. And corporations live forever, and they grow like dinosaurs to be too big. Now, so if to such an extent that those 8 men that control as many assets as the poorest 8.3 million people on this planet, they control that wealth through corporations. And the solution to have a people-powered planet is to have corporations having a use-by date, a limited life, to make them human scale.
Wasn't that originally what happened in the U.S., where Thomas Jefferson and so others had set up corporations to have a 20-year life, right?
This is a great example. The British used corporations that live forever as a way of privatizing colonization. Private people colonized America with in Canada, like the Hudson Bay Company, the Virginia Company, the Massachusetts Company. These corporations created in London that live forever were the source of the colonizing power. So after the American War of Independence, there was no federal government, there was no Securities and Exchange. To start a corporation in America in those times, as you rightly said, were licensed and created by state charters, and those state charters limit the life. If they gave a corporation, it had a limited life of 20 years, and it was designed and given a charter for a specific purpose. And if they didn't carry out that purpose, then they lost their charter. They disappeared. They were dissolved. So there's a great way to control corporations. If you don't carry out you meet your social purpose for being created, then you're struck off and it disappears. And we've got to go back to that way. If you've got to limit the life, let corporations become like real people by obey the laws of nature. And the laws of nature, you die. Before you die, you create children corporations, and those children corporations carry on after the 20 years, and you keep corporations to human scale, and you can do that with a tax incentive.
Tell me more. I was very interested in your proposal about how tax incentives could change this, and then I want to discuss how that could possibly work in this current context of where we're seeing uh, government going in a direction that's anti-democratizing. So first, but tell us first a little more. What is the idea of this tax incentive?
The tax incentive is to give the rich shareholders a bigger profit quicker with less risk, on condition that they change the constitution of corporations to give them a use-by date. And people say, well, that's impossible. Nobody would vote for that. But on 2 occasions, I've raised, as you said in the introduction, millions of dollars from hundreds of people to invest in a 15-year leases. Now, I've done that twice to fund companies that were later became publicly traded companies. Now, the point is that people were willing to invest just in 15 years. If you can get their money with a 15-year contract, why give it longer? After the 15 years, you can then distribute the ownership of those corporations to the have-nots, to the people that vote opposite to the people, to all citizens in their bioregions. And so what you want to end up with local ownership and control of the means of production and exchange. And so that's the way to look after the planet. Unless people own the corporations locally and are subject to the votes of local citizens, you can't look after the planet. And people say, oh, it's impossible. No, this cannot be done. But I've proved that in practice, greedy people will invest in limited life equities. And the proposal is you give this tax deduction for the rich shareholders. They change the constitution, so by book entry, it's done internally in the constitution of the corporations, that 5% of the investor's equity each year is transferred by book entry to a stakeholder account. And from that stakeholder account, you give away shares, free shares, to all the citizens that live in that community, and to localize the ownership and control. And 5% per year means at the end of 20 years, it's the community that owns all the corporation.
So that's an interesting concept, that somehow there can be a way to incentivize corporations actually wanting to move to community control, because apparently you have a way to build into the system where they would make more short-term money, which is what so many of them seem to be interested in exchange for a longer-term commitment to having the corporation then become something owned by the stakeholders in the long term. Is that essentially the concept?
Yeah, you got it precisely. Great, Arthur. That's a great summation of it. And one of the things that happens that when you're investing in a short-term investment, you want the organization not to keep any profits, retain its profits. They would distribute all profits each year, full payout of all profits, but they would have a dividend reinvestment plan. And so the profits could be reinvested, but not in the same parent corporation. The reinvestment would be in offspring or children corporations, so that the rich people could reinvest in them, could reinvest their dividends, but it would be on the same condition, that the ownership is shared with the poor people. And that's the way to democratize the wealth of nations. It was the idea that I published in my 1975 book on democratizing the wealth of nations by that technique. And it was summarized by the United Nations, distributed in 4 languages in 1976. And because of that, I got invited to both Prague and to Beijing in the 1990s and 91, when the communist countries were looking a way of privatization.
So yes, after the UN published your book on democratizing the wealth of nations, then At that point, there was an interest in China in doing something like that when they were moving toward a hierarchical society, and then there was a democratizing side. Tell us about that.
I first got invited to Prague in 1990 by the Central Planning Authority, and I made to promote. They translated my works from into their language, and at the same time in 1990, the Senator Long, who was chairman of the U.S. Finance Committee, was promoting employee share ownership plans, and his the man who wrote those tax plans was Jeff Gates, and Jeff Gates was sent by America to the Soviet Union to educate them on how to privatize with employee share ownership plans. These were invented by Lou Kelso, who wrote the Capitalist Manifesto. Employee share ownership plans require quite complicated financing arrangements with banks and tax incentives. And Jeff came back from the Soviet Union feeling like an emperor without clothes, because they didn't have a sophisticated enough financial system to make employee share plans practical in the Soviet Union. So he got invited then to the China by the Chinese Commission for Reforming the Economic System. And he said, Shann, the American system of worker ownership is too complicated to introduce to communist countries. Your system is much simpler. You simply give away the shares to the stakeholders. And that is how Jeff Gates led this 3-person delegation to China in 1991. It was they flew in cadres from about all around the country to a conference center. There's about 50 Chinese leaders in the conference, and we spent 10 days with serial translation, and it was very hard communicating. And we were made honorary shareholders of some cooperatives they had there, but the ideas didn't stick and didn't flourish.
Huh. So now you're the founding principal of the International Institute for Self-Governance in Sydney, Australia, and you authored a Australian parliamentary report on Aboriginal self-determination. It seems in reading some of your works that a lot of the models that you're talking about grow out of indigenous and Aboriginal cultures and things that we can learn from them that are particularly applicable to today's world. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, mostly correct. The Institute for International Self-Governance is simply a business name. It defines my research interests and my research purpose. It has no organization except myself as an individual. It's a badging, if you like. Now, I've been talking about community self-help for many years, and I was invited to the United States by the E.F. Schumacher Society in the 1980s by a marvelous man called Bob Swan, who was chairman of the Schumacher Society, and he had organized these week-long seminars with local leaders of how to transform society from the bottom up, and out of that came a book on building sustainable communities. Now those lectures, I also provided a lecture in Australia, in Western Australia, in the late 1970s it was, and one of the people that came to my lecture was the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. And in those days, Australia had the biggest uranium mines in the world, and they were trying to make the decision to exploit the uranium mines, which are all in Aboriginal country. And the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs wanted to, or the government indeed, the Fraser government in the 1970s, wanted to understand the impact would have on Aboriginal communities of distributing royalties, and they wanted somebody to do an impact statement. And they first went, of course, to our national university, Australian National University, to do the study, and they said they'd love to do it and they'd give an answer in a couple of years. And the minister said, that's too long, we need an answer in 3 months. And the minister knew the answer. He had been to my lectures and realized I was promoting bottom-up decision-making, which community decision-making, and knew self-determination. So he knew the answer he was going to get. And that is why I got the gig to do the report. Because it took time to do the research, to get the facts, 2 reports were done. So they were published as parliamentary papers in the Australian government. The first report was a policy one of how to go about things. The second report was getting the facts of what was going on in 3 different communities. The minister nominated 3 areas. One was a manganese mine on Groote Island that had been operating for some years from the 1960s, which they had a trust fund and was distributing dividends to the Aboriginal people on that island. So there was a real live role model of how they managed white man's totems. Another area to go to was a mission station in Owenpelly, where the mines were going to be. And a third study group was in a government organized community. In Owenpelly, I met all the local Aboriginal people in an earth-based tin shed, and the spokesman looked at me straight in the eye and says, "What right did I have to come to his country and write words for the minister?" And I said my right was that I knew nothing about them. And I said the purpose of my visit is to learn about you and see if we can find a compromise system between the white man's boss system of dictatorial command and control hierarchies and your community system of decision making. And the facts of the matter, the white man has the power, and we need to find ways we can learn from you people how we can distribute power more equitably and efficiently for bottom-up stakeholders decision making. So, and that was but it took a year to find out exactly where the cash was going, because Aboriginal communities, there's cash going in from all at 3 levels of government. There's local government obtaining cash, there's state governments providing cash, and the federal government. And tracing the cash going in and going out to see who gets it took a year to do. And of course, the result was really all those communities, the cash going in was a bit like foreign aid. It's always tied to conditions that you make more jobs for the white man rather than the indigenous people.
So there's something very interesting about what you're saying. So here we have what you're mentioning as the white man system, which was this dominator culture boxing people in to certain rigid boxes that that were totally the opposite of what the indigenous people were doing, which was sort of a more kind of bottom up kind of integrative economy growing out from nature and from the people, and then you were finding a way to try to bridge that. Is that essentially what was happening?
It's a beautiful summary, Arthur. You've got it in one. It's a great way of communicating, and the technical. The Aboriginal people see themselves as part of the environment, a part of the land. They have no word for ownership because they are part of the system, and they're governed by the endowments of nature. And each bioregion of this planet has unique different combinations of flora and fauna and geology and profile and weather and conditions. And each of those bioregions had its own language, and the knowledge of how to obtain well-being and exist and populate those areas was coded in the different languages. And in fact, about 700 different languages to match the 700 or so bioregions in Australia. and 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 their decision making. There was no one leader. The different decision making was distributed according to the clans, their totems, their skin groups, their tribes, and of course by the language groups of which they're in. Uh, and distributed decision making simplifies complexity. The world is too complex, and nature uses distributed decision making. In your brain, there's no chief executive neuron. Different parts of your brains make different decisions. And so different parts of your brains are competing with each other internally, between your internal needs and drives for food, water, comfort, and companionship, with the external opportunities and threats. And different parts of the brain become the dominant decision making. It changes around between the different parts of your brain to make different decisions. And this simplifies complexity. It creates internal checks and balances, distributed decision making. And the Nobel Prize was given to a lady called Elinor Ostrom in 2009 for introducing researching distributed decision making or self-governance of communities for 40 years. Now, the Nobel Prize Committee said in their announcement that economists unanimously thought that self-governance was impossible. They unanimously. So this lady, who's a political scientist, proved all economists wrong in 2009. And many economists still haven't learned about her work. And so there's still all business schools, all schools, graduate schools of business, management, and government, all teach people how to be better dictators like Putin, because management, the very word management means means bossing you around. It's a boss system, as the Aboriginal people call it. Now,
Right, a
being a
boss
political
system, a dominator system,
you
right?
dominate. It's an alien. You go to business schools and you're taught to be a better dictator, because
Right,
there's no accountability to your stakeholders, the community. No business can exist
right,
without suppliers, customers, and infrastructure and workers. And it only makes common sense that the stakeholder should have a voice. And this was announced by the biggest investor in the world, Larry Fink, in 2018. He said, we must stop groupthink. We must have key stakeholders brought to the decision-making table. He wanted in 2018, he wrote a letter to all his investors saying, we want a new way to govern. Now, that was the name of the public policy booklet I was commissioned to write for the London-based New Economics Foundation in 2002, when Thatcher
So,
privatization wasn't working. They knew they didn't want privatization. They didn't want government ownership, and they didn't want privatization. So what's the alternative?
yeah.
Community ownership and control.
It's very
And
interesting in talking about community ownership and control. So at first, it sounds like a lot of the things that you're advocating, if all the economists don't accept it or think it's possible, is this off in fairyland? But in fact, there is a very, very, very practical application of exactly what you're talking about that every one of you listening has. If you pull out your Visa card and the little Visa symbol, um, you may never even thought about it. But D. Hock, Melanie and I went to meet with him, and you knew him. D. Hock uh, was a visionary who very much supported the ideas of Garry Davis of moving toward interactive bottom-up way of having world governance, and he actually instituted this in starting Visa. Tell us how he got the stakeholders involved and how Visa grew out of this same concept of bottom-up stakeholder ownership. Tell us about that.
well, D. Hock's a marvelous man and it's great inspirational, and it's a living example of self-governance. Now, it blows the mind of people. Visa International has a hundreds of boards of directors. Now, I was talking about Elinor Ostrom as a political scientist, and she uses jargon words to describe distributed decision-making. She calls it polycentric governance, many centers of governance, like in your brain. And Dee Hock designed Visa the same way. But the reason they designed it that way, because there's a lot of banks back in the 1960s issuing this newfangled credit cards, and they're all going broke. And so they formed an association of all the banks, and became owned. So the Visa card Incorporated was owned by all the as a joint association of many banks. So every bank had its own board of directors issuing its own Visa card. It had absolute power over the conditions of the credit they issued to their communities, but they were all joined together as one organization. So it was a marvelous organization, and it's a living example of how you can introduce self-governance bottom up. Now, Visa later became publicly traded, but it is governed by the members, and the members are the various, so it's bank owned by individually, and they still keep their own, look after their own credit cards and their own districts. And there are other marvelous examples of organizations that have lasted over half a century. Visa is one of them, proving that self-governance is competitive and it's resilience. In England, they have the John Lewis Partnership, which owns many dozens of retail stores and supermarkets, and it is owned by the employees. In Europe, you've got the marvelous Mondragon cooperatives. Now, the John Lewis Partnership and the Mondragon cooperatives, they employ 80,000 people, but they're employed in various small groups which are federated together. So you have basic cooperatives, and you have groups of cooperatives, and then you have groups of cooperatives. And it's self-governance on a global level is illustrated by the Olympic sporting organization. The Olympic Committee is self-governing. It self-selects international sporting disciplines, which are self-governing, and those sporting disciplines are created by national sporting bodies, which are self-governing, and those national now not all, but some of those national sporting organizations, like we had in Australia, were self-governing, and I was the honorary chief executive of the Australian controlling body for skiing. It was an unincorporated federation of state bodies, and I wanted to employ people, and so I incorporated those state. We formed a non-profit corporation, but when I wrote the Constitution, it federated the self-governing state bodies, and the state bodies, in turn, were associations of self-governing clubs, and so you had self-governance from the local community clubs up to the states, up to the federal level, up to the discipline level, up to the global level. So you have a hierarchy of self-governing units from community to global. And that's my vision for creating a global governance for a people-powered planet from the bottom up.
Okay, so right now, the world is in an extremely deep crisis where we're plunging toward an end of any kind of democracy in the United States, where we're seeing a move toward disruption of even the minimal, the kind of democracy that was really still dominated by all the corporate and financial powers. But we see that crumbling. How does this, can you tell us a little bit more about your lifeboat money and how this might be a remedy to somehow, independently of government policy going bottom up, some way that we the people could create some kind of an interactive lifeboat economy that functions for citizens even when the top-down dominator system is failing.
Thank you. Lifeboat money is really just my name for what the people-powered planet in the 1930s actually did. And when the Federal Reserve ran out of reserves and would have gone bankrupt, um, the at that time, hundreds of communities throughout the United States, Canada, Mexico, in Europe, local town councils were issuing their own money. I call it lifeboat money because it's people-powered money, and it's self-liquidating money. It follows ecological rules with limited life, and how it works is a fellow, Irving Fisher, a famous economist in the 1930s, he wrote model legislation for introducing what they called stamped script, because the script were bits of paper issued by the local towns, and the local town council would issue this script and of $1, and the dollar would only be valid for as money for 1 week. At the end of the week, you had to buy a 2-cent stamp from the town council and put it on the back of the bit of paper. And the back of the bit, and each of these paper notes had 52 little squares with a date on it. And those 52 little squares, each week, whoever held that money had to buy a 2-cent stamp and put it on the back of the note. Well, after 52 weeks, 52 stamps of 2 cents had been sold. So the town council had raised 102 cents. So at the end of the year, 52 weeks, you could go and redeem your money from the town council and for cash. And the town council, 52 by 2 is 104, would use the 100 cents to redeem the notes, and it had made a 4-cent profit. So you create money which is self-liquidating. Now,
Okay,
you still
so
there?
here, let me just show on the screen here what you're talking about. So what you were mentioning is that the city had issued these dollars, and these are the little stamps, and if it was a use it or lose it money. The faster you spent it, the more it was worth because it lost 2 cents every month or whatever it is. And so you had to use it quickly, which meant that it circulated. See, the whole way that money works is it's a flow. My dad always said that currency is a good word for it because it's like electricity. Electricity is a current, and if that current stops flowing, it disappears. There's no power. It can't turn motors. It can't do anything, and nothing's gone. It's not flowing. And so if money is flowing, people are creating more things and so on. So if you have a small community like Michigan here, and everybody's impoverished, there's no money, things aren't moving, and you give everybody, say you give everybody gets $100,000 or whatever figure you want is given to everybody in money that is disappearing. It's losing value all the time. So you want to spend it right away because if you don't spend it, it's going to be worth less. So you start buying. So you buy new clothes, and the person who is the tailor has to buy more cotton and supplies, and the farmer has to make more goods, and it starts circulating around and around and around. Everybody's circulating that money, and the more that money is flowing and circulating, the more everybody's getting well off and surviving. And I think this idea of yours, you called it CPA speed money, you showed there were a number of examples where people have done this kind of negative money, even during the Depression here and so on. And I think what's sort of key about that is that as we're coming into these kind of crazy times, maybe if the central economy begins to collapse because of all the insanity going on, maybe we need some ways that we as communities can survive. I want to go through your whole older presentation because we're actually getting toward the question period here. But let me just go down to one more thing. So you said lifeboat money can fund the unemployed and distressed businesses. Well, we're going to see a lot of that unemployed and distressed citizens businesses uh, as we reach this area where you know. Medicaid benefits are restricted. People can't buy. The flow is stopped. Is there a way that somehow this lifeboat money might be something that people power could create? That we could somehow create online a kind of a digital disappearing money currency that could sustain people, where everybody who subscribes and becomes part of the system suddenly has whatever it is, $10,000 to spend and start circulating around, and they start finding a way to help the people who are in desperate need because the current financial system of the collapse that's likely to grow out of uh, the current end game of the old dominator culture.
Oh, yeah, exactly, Arthur. It's great that you be able to show those old slides of mine. Thank you very much. Now, it's 2% a week. Now, you say if you could do it in digital form, then the cost of lifeboat money is less than the commission of Apple Pay commission. It's just a fraction. It's a fraction of a percent because because you can use it daily. On a daily basis, the cost of lifeboat money is 7 into 2, which is 0.3% or something. Which it's less than a Visa card commission. And so it is very practical to do, and that's why we formed the Sustainable Money Working Group after the 2008 financial crisis. And London, you had a picture of the in your slides there of a meeting we had at the Grand Hall of the Institute of Accountants, where the chairman of the New Economics Foundation chaired the meeting. And the people attending that meeting in 2011, I think it was, represented enough voters in United Kingdom to elect the government, because you had the cooperative movement as members, and you had the Chamber of Commerce were members, because the Chamber of Commerce wanted a way for their members, which are all small businesses, to exist if the financial system crashed again. And this lifeboat money is now being issued again in Germany. It's not at 2%, it's a lower rate, but it is legally accepted that it can exist. And in England, the Secretary General of the Chamber of Manufacturers says it may be legal, but if it isn't legal in a financial crisis, the government would change the laws to allow it to happen. So I'd encourage you very much for the people-powered planet to prepare and issue lifeboat money.
Very, very interesting. I'd love to talk to you for hours. You're such a wealth of ideas and background and innovative concepts. But I want to now turn it over to the question period, which Melanie will handle. So here is our producer, Melanie Bennett.
Hello, hello. My goodness. Thank you so much, Arthur. I am so enthralled. I've been listening carefully, and I love what you're saying. I mean, this is incredible. I'm learning so much. I would like to ask if David Gallup, who is carrying on Garry Davis's work, can jump in for just a moment. David, hi, come on in.
Shann, I'm so delighted to see you again. It's been a long time since we've probably had a chance to chat. I would say, listening to you, it just makes me think about if Garry were here, what he would say to you, Shann, is, look, what you're doing from an economic or corporation perspective is what we humans need to do from a governing perspective. We have to share our power and our right to govern our own world, and we have to do it from a sustainable perspective. So we have to look at not just ourselves, but as you stated right near the beginning of your comments, that we need to see, and as is true of indigenous populations, we need to see ourselves as part of this big web of life, and in a sense have a web of government so that the local and the global actually work together and not against each other.
Yes, well done.
So let me ask you a question, I guess. What do you think, if you were going to extrapolate your economic theories to political or governing theories, what would you say? How would you do that?
Well, it's not theories. I'm a practical business person who's
Okay,
actually
sure.
put it in, and there's a science of governance. All living things, your body is self-regulating, self-governing, self-repairing. The practice of self-governance, we simply just got to follow the practices of nature. And the self-governance has got to be from the bottom up, because the endowments in nature are different in each geological territory and climate area. So we've got to have, it'll be local self-determination, self-reliance by bioregion in this, and these bioregions are basically river valleys where you've got the same sort of commonality of fauna and flora, and the Aborigines sorted that out with having a different language to describe each of their regions. So we've got to go back to local ownership and control. The main thing is, if you've got 8 people owning half the assets of the world, the total population that's going to survive for eternity is only going to be 1% of the present gene population. Hopefully at least 20%, 2 billion people can live sustainably on an eternal basis rather than just 1%. So sharing the power is the most important critical thing for saving humanity from extinction, because if we don't become part of nature, nature will kill us off.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much, Shann.
Very, very good point. Very good point. That's a motivating factor. Yeah.
And I was going to just show you real quick that Garry had worked with his gurus, Nataraja Guru and Guru Chaitanya Yati, on a memorandum on self-government and harmonious world order. So even back into the 1950s, Garry was thinking about this idea of us, the governors of our world.
The reason I go on annual conference trips trying to educate the scholars about the real world. And there's a huge void of education of self-governance, because economists unanimously thought it was impossible, and nobody's teaching. It's just a huge void, and the American Academy of Management accepted a caucus meeting that I initiated some years ago to try and fill that gap. But nobody's taken up the initiative yet to introduce courses of how to rewrite corporate constitutions to turn them, to obey the laws of nature and become ecological, and sharing ownership and control in the local host bioregion. So education is a vital point, and maybe you should start an education course as well as issuing lifeboat money. So please carry on the good work.
I just can't thank you enough from the bottom of my heart, and we'll get the message out, and everybody here, please get the message out. It was beautiful, beautiful podcast. And now I'll go back to Arthur. Arthur, go ahead, take it away.
Thank you so much, Shann. It was really extraordinary having you here. We love that you're thinking about these kind of thoughts, and that are so critically and crucially needed in the world today. Search for Shann Turnbull on YouTube. You probably could see some of his videos that have some fascinating follow-up discussion on this. Any particular thing you'd like to point to, Shann?
No, except what you've done yourself. Thank you. And I've got, but happy to have inquiries, and a Google search will come up with a number of podcasts and more academic scholarship than you'd want to read.
All right. Well, we're really pleased to have you here. Thank you, Shann, for your very thought-provoking insights. We welcome you this week and every week on the People-Powered Planet.
World citizen, lift up your voices. Oh, you know we got something to say. All we need is the same directions, heading in one way.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video.